Hi. So before I was a user experience manager, I started as an interaction designer, line designer. Then I was a functional lead as an interaction designer, and then I started running overall experience teams. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. And I never use these things, so hopefully I'll point to it in the right direction. So let's assume you're a newly minted user experience manager. You've moved from designer now you're a UX manager. On the org chart, that distance isn't actually so far, but the move from design contributor to the actual manager is actually a pretty long road. And if you're at all like I was, you're completely unprepared for that. So that can lead to problems with the people on your team, problems with the people that you work with. So you need to get on top of that as quickly as possible. You have to learn to understand the differences between being a manager and being a designer. So this is just a crazy graph that says strategy at the top, tactics at the bottom. And when you're a designer, you tend to focus on project strategy, project tactics, and you cover the gamut of particular projects. If you're really lucky, you only have one. I've never actually been in that position, but I hear it happens. You may be doing different levels of this in different projects, and there may be a lot of them, but that's really the level at which you're working as a sole contributor. As a functional manager, you tend to focus on where you're on the kind of cross-product strategy. You're not focusing so much on the experience strategy itself across the entire organization. You're looking across all the projects that are within your functional realm. You dig into tactics for certain projects that are particularly important. But as the experience lead, as the experience manager, you're working almost exclusively in the experience strategy realm. So cross-company, you delve a bit into project strategy across all the projects to make sure that things are going well. And then there's a few key projects where you might dip into tactics, but mostly as design review. You don't have time to know exactly how somebody's solving all the problems in any particular project. Particularly if at Snapfish, I've probably got 150 projects going right now. So there's absolutely no way that I could know more than a couple of those projects in any serious detail. So that's just the overlay of what happens as you kind of go up the stream. So there's some takeaways from this. Tactics for individual projects, they're not your job anymore. They're the designer's job. And yeah, there's caveats about this that some people aren't as good. You have to get closer to some people than others, but the fact is it's not your job anymore. It's a designer's job. And if you interfere with those tactics without a very good reason, you're going to do two things. You're going to undercut the respect for the individual designer in the organization, and you're going to create personal friction with those designers. So you've got to find another way to deal with that. So it's another thing that happens to you. There's a change in metrics. So this is a bell graph. On the left is of design goodness, let's say. You could go from total crap to perfection, right? And really the bell chart probably should have been heavier on the total crap side, and the long tail should be perfection. But you have to actually recalibrate your metrics about how you think about where things fall in this. As a designer, good enough for you tends to fall on the far side of the curve. You're really interested in getting as far as you can to help the customer as much as possible do the task that the customer is interested in doing. And the point at which you're going to say, hey, this is kind of the outside realm of my range of acceptable is where you're getting diminishing returns for the amount of effort that you're putting in. You're going to put in a lot of effort and only get a small benefit. As a user experience manager, however, you've got a completely different range that you're looking at. You're actually investigating things from the kind of old-time resources money triangle to say, for these particular projects and looking at the overall strategy, what is good enough in a minimal sense? And then, where's too good for the ROI? So your overlap as a designer, and particularly if you come from the design background, you want this kind of farther end of things. But as a user experience manager, that's not the same. You don't have the same interests. So there's a cognitive dissonance here that goes on where you're kind of fighting yourself internally. So there's some stuff that comes out of this. You have to acknowledge to yourself that there's this split, that you have diverging ideas about what you want. And you have to do that to make sure that you're consciously choosing what is the best way to look at a particular problem. And you also have to clearly identify with the team which hat you're wearing when. So if you're participating in design critique on a key project, you have to be really clear that you're making design critique as opposed to a business decision. As soon as you stray into the realm of business decision, you're taking autonomy away from the designer. So if you're offering design critique, oftentimes that doesn't actually have to be taken. It's just a suggestion. You're working as a designer. But if you're offering a business critique and you're saying this is where we stop working on this, then the designer has to say, yes, I understand that's a business decision. It's not to say that designers don't think about business things or that user experience managers don't think about design, but this is a really critical distinction in how you think about the way that you're dealing with your designers and also the way that you're dealing with your projects. Third thing is there's a change of attitude here, and this is not meant to be total crap to perfection on this side. This is really, there's a spectrum of possible designs, and this also is probably a bell curve. And really, as a designer, you have a set of solutions that you might have come to yourself for this particular set of challenges that you have from an experience perspective. And that is a combination of what you've done in the past, your experience, and what your personal style is, what your design proclivity is. So there is this range that says, hey, these are probably where the answers that I would have come to on this particular problem might fall. But they're not the only answers. There could be a whole bunch of answers along that range that might be equally as valid. They're just not the ones that you personally would have picked. So now what you have to do is you have to step back from where you would have gotten as a designer, and you have to say, as a user experience manager, there are things that are important. The range of acceptable for a user experience manager is much larger than the range of acceptable for a designer. And if I was to be honest here, and I wasn't, because I put my range of acceptable solutions within the UX manager's range, I might actually not fall within that, or there might be much less overlap. So we have to kind of understand that this separation exists. And what do we take away from that? When we're doing design review, we've got to step back from our personal preferences. And we can't, and this is really, really important, we can't expect and we shouldn't expect our designers to be us. There's no recipe that will lead you to unhappy designers faster than expecting them to do the same thing that you would do, at least in my experience, and I think I have a fair bit of it at this point. And while we're ultimately responsible for the quality of the design work on our teams, we have to trust our team and the processes we put in place to get them to the solutions that are within that realm of acceptable. And when we do encounter a design that falls outside of that acceptable range, we have to be very clear with the designers the reasons why it falls outside of those range, and whether those reasons are design reasons or business reasons or a combination of both. So that designers are always clear that they always understand which hat you're wearing when and what the basis of any particular critique is. So this is the big mistake that I made when I first became a design manager. I assumed that being a design manager was a superset of being a designer. It is not in any way a superset. Well, I won't say in any way, but there's overlap, but they're different jobs. It's just not the same thing. And if you make the mistake of not thinking about these things as being different jobs, and if you start to identify yourself as the designer, you're going to end up with conflict on your team, and that's just going to make everybody incredibly unhappy, including you, and obviously not lead to success. So that's it. Thanks.